understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How you doing there? It is time for the podcast, and I find myself, it's the wandering Paddy. I am traveling yet again, John. I am in Vilnius, what I would call the Badlands of Eastern Europe, between Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, then you've got Ukraine down the south here. And ironically, John, this is 35 years or 34 odd years after as the crow flies from where I am, about 150 kilometers into Western Russia, a town called Smolensk, big Russian city. And then beyond it, a little village called Novi Ruza is the place that I spent many months learning Russian. Yeah. So, and again, what you notice about this, and I think one of the reasons this area has been so fought over, is the land is completely flat.
Right.
So there's
fertile then.
It's flat and it's fertile, but for armies, it's been fought over. There's no natural geographic boundary for an army on the move.
Right.
So, what you're talking about, basically, it's just as the crow flies, it's flat all the way to Moscow from here.
Mac, let me ask you, do you get a stamp on your passport every time you go in and out of the country? Because you must have a big tome of a passport.
John,
now.
I do it for you. I do it for content. I do it for the listeners, John. I do it for the listeners.
I know you.
So that we have varied, eclectic, odd contact all around. No, it's just I've been on a bit of a tour, but it'll be all come to an end soon.
Well, speaking of podcasts, Mac, I believe you got a shout out on the second best podcast in the world, Joe Rogan.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
It's hard that you should bring it up because I was sitting at a table with a couple of journalists, a friend of mine, this economist called David McWilliams. You'd love him, by the way. He's the guy who says the poor think in minutes, the rich think in years. That kind of one of his quotes. But anyway, sitting with a bunch of people from London, and this guy's going, yeah. He says, McWilliams here, he's all about you two. He's all about you, yeah. He hasn't got any of your fucking records.
There you go. I'm expecting you to be on that podcast very soon.
Is not a bad PR man to have.
Yes,
not a bad PR man to have. So, Joe, if you're listening all day, and you know what, Joe? We'll have you on too. So it'll be okay.
We'll boost your numbers.
Yeah. Reciprocity, Joe, reciprocity. And the fact that you're a quarter Irish, we can dig deep. We might even give you a passport if you want to get out of there.
Yeah.
Okay, let us get on now with the Baltics. Speaking of a quarter Irish, amazing that the Baltics, together with Poland, constitute around 8% of the Irish population, which is phenomenal. Or did when the migration from this part of the world was most significant in Ireland just before the 2008 crash.
And then after the crash, a lot of them
went home. And actual fact, we're going to talk about this area. So basically, we're talking about the Baltics. We're talking about south to Ukraine. We're talking about what Timothy Snyder, the American historian, called the Bloodlands, which is very descriptive. I mean, when you're here, and again, I've been coming to this part of the world for a long, long time, but always you get that sense of history, but not just history. You get that sense of mutilation, humiliation, ethnic cleansing, the stuff that these people did to each other, whether they were under German tutelage or under Russian tutelage or Ukrainians, Belarusians themselves. I mean, this was the part of Europe where the most outrageous crimes were committed in the Holocaust, not just the Holocaust, but between the various different races. And you get a sense still of the fragility of the whole thing. But it's 35 years since independence, John, or re-independence, as they call it, and part of the regions are doing reasonably well.
I think it's more than reasonably well. I mean, they've really come a long, long way from a very low base.
Yeah, no, they really have. And they always had, even the Soviet Union, when I first traveled here and it was the Soviet Union, there was always a sense that the Balts were different. They were more sophisticated, more European, more Western orientated. They were richer than the average, which is why so many Russians migrated to the Baltic countries, so much so that by the late 1980s, there was a fear for Baltic culture completely. Russian language was taking over, the Russification of the education system, all that. But that has all now been reversed. And what you have is three very distinct, thriving languages, cultures, etc. here. But, John, but, the big but is, of course, the war in Ukraine looms, and you can't have a conversation without people referencing it. And the fear of Russia, the anger towards Russia, the sense of frustration that the Russians are back.
Is there a feel that they're kind of on tender hooks waiting for like the fact that they might be next?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I spoke to a Lithuanian woman last night, and she was saying, if we don't stop them, i.e. the West, stop the Russians in Ukraine, she said they will definitely come here. And they will definitely. So that's the local Lithuanian view. And it was very, very much kind of, there was 3 or 4 of them at the dinner table last night, and they were absolutely saying this, that the Russians will come and take them.
Yeah.
Whereas, other people are a little bit more sanguine. So I'll tell you, we have a resident Baltic expert, James Oates, my old mucker, Scottish James Oates, who's been living in Estonia for most of the last 35 years. He's deeply embedded in the culture here, a great economist, great political thinker. Let's go to Tallinn and get the lowdown from James. We are now going to the podcast's resident Baltic expert. He is up in Tallinn. He is an old mucker of mine. He and I worked together many, many years ago in this emerging markets is part of the world in Eastern Europe. James Oates, great to see you. How are you?
I'm extremely well, David, and always good to catch up.
Well, listen, James, let's just set the scene. We are 30 to 35 years after re-independence of the Baltic states, the Estonias, the Latvias, the Lithuanias of this world. And again, as has been the case for hundreds of years, Russia is now breathing down their necks.
Yeah, but they're very, very un-Russian. I mean, there's a huge difference between the economies of the Baltic and the economy of Russia. Russia is a land power. The Baltic, well, the clue is in the name, they're sea powers. So the towns and cities of the Baltic littoral were always linked to the West. It's why they're mostly Protestant, except the Lithuanians are Catholic. It's why they use the Latin alphabet. It's why they understand the West, because they are the West. And the Russian occupation actually didn't last very long. And Peter the Great only turned up in 1710. So for all the centuries before that, it was never Russian. I mean, the Russians kept invading periodically, but they were always defeated. So in fact, in all the thousands of years of Baltic history, only 200 are actually Russian. And as soon as they possibly could, the Balts got rid of them again. Because, just think of it this way. When you've got technology of horse and rider, it's still going to take you weeks and weeks to get from the Baltic to Moscow. Whereas with a boat, you can get to Amsterdam in a few days. So that's why they're Western. They're economically, they've always been Western. Culturally, they're Western. But yeah, here we go again. The Russians think that they want the seacoast. But you know what? It's not theirs.
I know it's not theirs, but I'm here in Vilnius. We're actually going to do a podcast on the Hanseatic League next week to encapsulate your notion of ships going from Riga around to London and Amsterdam, which was very much the case for hundreds of years in the medieval times, the Middle Ages. But let me just come back to today, right? I'm talking to people here. They're not that concerned, but this week I arrive here. The Ukrainians have sent drones to destroy Russian planes thousands of kilometers away from Ukraine. What does that do? Is that psychological? Is it Pyrrhic? What's your sense of what's happening in Ukraine, which is just down the road?
Well, I think there's several things to pick up here. I mean, the most important is that this is an absolute disaster for Russia. It's not just that they've lost a good proportion of their strategic bombing squadrons, they've also lost their AWACS. Now, they only had 3 of them, and they cost an absolute fortune. So this has cost billions of dollars for Russia. And the fact that the Ukrainians have been able to do that is pretty staggering. So from the point of view of the Baltic, we're much less concerned than we were 3.5 years ago when all this thing kicked off in Ukraine. In fact, strictly speaking, the invasion really goes back to when they seized territory in 2014, not in 2022. But there's no doubt that here people are thinking carefully to make damn sure that what happened in Ukraine does not happen in the Baltic. And that is why you've seen defense tech funds being set up. There is an increasingly strong tech-driven drone industry. There's a lot of liaison going on with the Ukrainian armed forces. So, it's not that we're that worried about being invaded. We're just going to make damn sure that we're not going to be invaded. And yeah, the Hanseatic League is good. And, where we used to work in London, and there was the steel yard underneath Cannon Street Station. And that was the Hanseatic headquarters. So there'd been Estonians and Latvians and Lithuanians in London for a very long time. It wasn't just when we were there.
Okay, well let's catch on. Well, actually, we need to get that whole crew back together again for a knees up one
We
of these
surely
days.
do.
But let's talk about the Baltic economy, because tech has been something that the Baltic countries, particularly Estonia, have been at the vanguard of, so much so that people think the Baltics governments are amongst the most efficient governments in the world and tech savvy. So explain what's going on here.
Well, it goes back to even before independence was restored, people were curious about computers. And in the immediate aftermath of independence, there was an awful lot of thinking about how do we get modern technology into these countries. Now, bear in mind, the Soviet Union was spectacularly primitive. So even a basic telephone system they didn't have. So Finland turned around and said to the Estonians, well, you can have our old phone system if you like, and we're upgrading. And the Estonians said, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. What we want to do is jointly procure the new systems with you. So they did a leap in the technology and went straight into the most modern technology. So that was an important thing. And they had another leap, the so-called Tigrihupa, the tiger leap, where basically everybody was taught how to use internet access. I mean, you went to the library. If you're a little old lady, some babushka, you'd go into the library and they teach you how to use the system. So they never had paper-based systems. It was always from the very beginning digitally enabled with a very strong, secure digital ID. And that means that you can only access a system using this. So effectively, all the countries function as a kind of local area network, but it's incredibly secure because we have a neighbor that would like to disrupt us. So it's cybersecurity. I mean, the NATO headquarters for cybersecurity is in Tallinn. The Center for Excellence. So they've always been aware of that. And then from that, we got people starting to think in a bigger way. So it started in Estonia with Skype, which actually was just switched off 2 weeks ago. But from Skype, the guys who made $4 billion out of Skype put it into so many other things, Wise, Bolt. And so you've got this hashtag Estonian mafia. And the same thing has happened in Lithuania, and the same thing has happened in Latvia to different degrees. So they've got the technology, they knew how to use it, and then they developed a kind of recycling of capital. The fact that they also now set up with, folk in the west coast of the States just underlines that, this is an important tech node. I mean, it's not just, some wee countries over there. We're actually part of the global network. You can access anything, anywhere from here. Now, of course, that means that we can also be accessed, and that's why cybersecurity is such a big thing. And all financial transactions, all taxation is done online here. Now, the costs of that are spectacularly much lower. I mean, about 4 years ago, the total costs of collecting tax revenue in the UK was about 3% of revenue, which was about 22 billion quid. That's bigger than the Estonian economy.
Wow.
So
Wow.
in Estonia, it's 0.007 of revenue. So what you've got here is an extremely efficient system. I mean, the Maksu Tolliamet, the equivalent of the tax collection authority in Estonia, is the most trusted state institution. You log on, you agree what you've paid or not paid. They tell you if you are to receive money, you get it 2 days later. If you're to pay money, they give you some time to pay. But it's that efficient. It's so quick and easy.
And everyone has an ID card. Isn't this the case that has all the information about people's health, about everything? So the ID card is essential.
The ID card is, but not quite in the way you think. It's not on the card. The information on the card is basically your name and address and contacts. but you cannot access any of the state servers without going through a thing called the X road. And the X road is basically a bunch of sentry programs. So you cannot get into the healthcare system, the car taxation system, the Maksutoliama, the general
The
taxation.
education system, for example.
Everything. So there is nothing you cannot do online in Estonia now.
And Latvia and Lithuania are catching up as well.
They're pretty much the same. Lithuania is. Latvia does things slightly differently, but all three are, in global terms, they're up there, way up there in cyber cleverness. I mean, they're better than Singapore in some ways. So it really is it's globally powerful.
And I was also reading that as a percentage of population, the Baltics should have about 1% of the unicorns in Europe, and they have about 14%. This is the tech unicorns. I mean, those tech unicorns may not become unicorns. They have to exit. They have to actually sell themselves. But that gives you a sense of how much above their weight these guys are punching.
Well, where you are right now, you've got Revolut. That was basically a Lithuanian idea. Here we've got Bolt. We've got various. I mean, there are about 11 Estonian unicorns for a population of 1 million,
which is extraordinary.
2/3 the population of Surrey. Just saying. And this is why this country is going so well. I mean, obviously it's not comfortable living next door to Mordor, but you know what? It's fine. We're now talking about having a completely automated drone defense system. Now that's the kind of thing that the Ukrainians have pioneered. Here we're already prepared. Now, just bear in mind the Russians have not made a big success of their attack on Ukraine. I think it's pretty damn near impossible for them to attack NATO without, severe consequences. So, although we obviously need to be prepared, the reality is that we don't feel that we're going to lose. We just don't want to be attacked in the first place. It's a question of deterrence.
And on that, I see there's a brigade of German troops in Lithuania. 4,000 German troops, I was told, are now stationed in Lithuania.
That's right. And also we've got 1,200 odd Brits, plus Americans, Canadians, Germans, Danes, French. There's a significant military presence here. And it's not just a tripwire. I mean, they're well equipped. It would hurt to go against them. And, and to be honest, the nearest Russian tank to the Baltic right now, from Tallinn, it's about 1,000 kilometers and it's probably in flames. So, occasionally the Russians move troops around and they put some near the Finnish border. Well, they're perfectly entitled to put troops close to the border on their side. But at the end of the day, the idea that they could cross the border, it's not looking that likely right now, is it? They can't beat Ukraine. They're not going to beat NATO.
James, I was just on that. I was just reading something earlier on today about the Russian buildup of troops along the Finnish border.
Aye.
And Finland having the longest border with Russia. I was going to ask you, is that something to be concerned about?
Well, the last time the Russians attacked Finland, they lost. And, I think when you're looking at the Putin government, yeah, you've got to be concerned. But realistically, are they actually, they can't deal with Ukraine. How the hell are they going to deal with the Finns, who are armed to the teeth? I mean, they're exceptionally well prepared. So sure, the border's long, but that cuts both ways. And, I would just point out that the Ukrainians have attacked not just the strategic bomber bases in Siberia, but also in the Kola Peninsula. And there were reports of explosions in Sveromorsk, which is their major submarine base for their submarine-launched nuclear deterrent. Well, hang on, if the Ukrainians can do that, what do you think NATO can do? And
Yeah.
I mean, in 1940, the Balts were alone. We had the Germans behind us and the Russians in front of us, and it was a mess. Behind us now, we've got Sweden and Germany on our side. NATO goes all the way back. We've got strategic depth. We didn't have that before. So the idea that it's all going to be, oh no, we're going to face the same thing as we did in 1940, a Russian invasion. You know what? That's just not true. The issue is to make sure that they don't cross the border in the first place. I mean, the Finns are more than capable of pushing them back. In fact, if I were a Russian, picking a fight with a Finn is a very dangerous thing to do.
James, can we just switch away from the armchair generals, the three of us, and go back to the economics, right? Because you will wonder if I was. Can I have a brandy and port, please? Anyway, I want to talk about the economics. I'm fascinated by the fact that, of course, these economies have taken a hit because of the war in Ukraine. There's a huge amount of Ukrainian refugees, particularly here in Lithuania. Of course, investment is down because people are worried. You know, it doesn't really matter how you say, look, we're not worried, we're well prepared. There's a jittery feel to capital flows coming in here. But, and this is interesting, John and I have lament the inability of Ireland, and I think our British listeners will also accord with this, and Britain, to build rail infrastructure. I see Rail Baltica is now in train, which is a railway system from Finland all the way down to Poland through all the Baltic states.
Yeah, I mean, the railway itself starts in Tallinn, but there's a connection with a ferry to go to Finland, and that's where much of the Finnish trade comes out from. There is also, by the way, some discussion in building a tunnel across to Finland. As for Rail Baltica itself, there are two things. First of all, it's high speed, not as high speed as the TGVs, but still plenty high speed enough for this part of the world. And secondly, it's in the European gauge as opposed to the broad gauge,
which is the Russian gauge.
Well, Russian and Central Asia and Finland and the Baltic. And, you know, so basically everywhere between China and Europe uses the broad gauge. Now, that's fine if you're shifting stuff here, but you need to change the gauge. Well, the good news is that you can do that in either in Muuga, which is the port of Tallinn, the commercial port where the two railways will meet. They'll also meet near Riga in Salaspils, and they'll also meet in Kaunas. So they'll be able to transship from east to west to Rail Baltica. Now, obviously, that assumes that one day the Russians reopen. But, you know, even if they don't, you've got an important strategic link, but it will also speed things up. I mean, the railway line, there is actually a rail connection, Tallinn to Vilnius, and you change in a place called Valga, which is on the Latvian-Estonian border. But it's a zigzag, so it really goes a very dog-leggy way around. Having a quick, direct line, 600 kilometers, you'll be able to do it in 4 hours.
Well, I think we should be franchising, John. We should be actually coming down to this neck of the woods, the Irish authorities, and saying, how do you do it? On the basis, John, do you know that every one person in 100 in Ireland is Lithuanian? Did you know that?
No, I did not.
It is. We have 50,000 Lithuanian immigrants in Ireland. So on the basis of the 50,000, they can speak Lithuanian, they can work in the railways, maybe they could do it. James, just before you go, I want to pivot. You talked about the Baltic, the big power in the Baltic, of course, historically Scandinavians, but of course, Poland. And the Poles in the last couple of days have voted in a president who is populist, who is anti-European, who is pro-Polish, not so much anti-Russian, pro-Polish. Why do you think? Because, and this is a very broad discussion, our general worldview has always been, look, the antidote to populism is a strong economy. You create a strong economy, you create opportunity, people will vote liberally towards the center, right? Poland is the fastest growing economy in Europe. It is the absolute standout success of the last 35 years in Central and Eastern Europe. And yet, here they are voting for somebody who, if allowed, follow policies, and I know it's a rather ceremonial position, would be turning his back and Poland's back and all that. How do we explain it?
Well, first of all, bear in mind how close the result was. I mean, basically, it came down to 70-odd thousand votes. It was really, really close. Now, we've had a cohabitation in Poland up until now, because Andrzej Duda is from the same tradition as Nawrocki, the guy who's just won.
The new guy, yeah.
So it means that cohabitation continues. But the difference is that Duda was a lame duck president and Nawrocki isn't. So it does create some big problems for Donald Tusk, the prime minister, and his party. And it does make it look like the PIS, the more populist party, Conservative Party, may be on its way back. However, nothing is certain. And as I say, it was an exceptionally close result, by far the closest result of the Third Republic. So I think it's a bit soon to tell. And in any event, Nawrocki is not anti-European as such. He's what you might call a Eurosceptic, but he knows fine well that, Poland has to work within a European system to some degree. Now, his view, Poland first, okay, well, that's not a unique position for European politicians these days, is it? So I think it's a wee bit soon to tell. My feeling is it's obviously not great news for Tusk, but in terms of the economic future for Poland, well, it's been as you say, an extraordinary achievement. I mean, it's been consistent year in, year out. Growth, investment, and the development of the country is spectacular. I mean, you want railways, go to Poland. They're building a massive new airport now between Łódź and Warsaw. They're building high-speed railways off to Germany and in our direction up to the north. They're building highways everywhere. I mean, when I first went to Poland, there were basically no motorways. Now you can get 2 hours more quickly by car from Tallinn to Warsaw because they've built the highways. So all of that will continue. I think it will make decisions on Ukraine a little bit more complicated. I think it will
tease that out for me. Tease that out for me.
Well, because you talk about 1% of the Irish population being Lithuanian. I mean, bear in mind that the Poles.
Oh, by the way, at a certain stage, 5% of the Irish population was Polish.
Well, would you like to guess what percentage of Ukrainians are in Poland? I mean, they've taken by far the most of any country. At one point, they had nearly 3 million Ukrainians. That's 10% of the population of Poland. And, people do feel like that's been a bit difficult. Can we have some help, please? I mean, the Balts have also done that. I mean, in Estonia, we've got 70-odd thousand Ukrainians. But they have spread out a bit. But, from the Polish perspective, they've been asked to do a great deal, which they have done. And I don't think Nawrocki would argue about that. The question then comes is, so what now? And I think there is a general sense that actually we do need to do something more proactive on Ukraine. And the question then is what? I mean, we've got all sorts of people now telling us we need to rearm. Oh, no shit, Sherlock. So the question is, so what next? And I think actually, Nawrocki is a historian. And, if you're a historian of Poland, you tend to be quite pessimistic. Not to say depressed. So his view is
not to put too fine a point on it. They haven't had a great 200 years.
Well, it's been tricky, so I think from their point of view, they're now going, okay, the rest of the EU, got to start doing something more proactive to help us. And it's not just solidarity with Ukraine that matters; it's solidarity with the frontline states, and that means the Baltic and Poland and Finland now.
James, as always, it is a pleasure. It's a shame I can't get up to see you, but, get on that slow speed rail tonight and you can be down here tomorrow.
I can be down in about 7 hours by car.
Well, I'm working here for the next couple of days, so it's all to play for. This, James, as always, absolute pleasure and fascinating stuff.
Always a pleasure.
Mike, I have a couple of questions I just want to ask you. We'll come back to Poland in a second and James's comments on Poland. But when he was talking about how online Estonia is, everything is online.
And I think the other two, they're a little bit behind them, but they're miles ahead of us.
But even going as far as teaching the babushkas, the old women, getting them online and teaching them computers, which is fantastic. But as he was saying all that, I was thinking back on our conversation with Joe Haslam and about the lights out moment that Spain and Portugal had. If the lights go out, I know he was talking about, they're very conscious of cybersecurity and all the rest, but where is their energy coming from? Is that their Achilles heel, or could it be their Achilles heel?
Well, I think the Estonians are going nuclear and they're planning to have nuclear power plants. I'd say they get, and I'm not sure there's a lot of wind energy here, but like
sure,
most
Baltic
Europeans.
Up there.
Right, exactly. Well done. I was just thinking you'd actually love it, John. It's the home of death metal. You'd love it.
Yes.
There's so many metalers here. Like there's just fellas with sort of Megadeth t-shirts and all that. It's funny. You also talk about older people on online. My mum is on Twitter. She's 90 this year.
Wow.
Yeah. She calls it Tinder, which is great. I saw you in the Tinder the other day.
Swipe right, Mrs. Mag.
Exactly. But listen. No, I think they obviously get a lot of their energy from Sweden. I mean, basically, all of Europe has an energy problem, most particularly acute in Germany.
Yeah.
Europe doesn't have indigenous sources of oil or gas in the quantities that Europe needs. So what you have, the Scandinavians have massive hydroelectric power and nuclear power. And I'm sure that that's where if there's an interconnector, that's where the Estonians get their stuff from. But they would have been very, very dependent on Russian gas. No doubt of that, up until 3 years ago. And now they've had to turn around, like everybody had to turn around, So, and again, that's what the crazy thing about the American sanctions is that the one thing that Europeans import from the Americans is energy, is gas, LPG, So again, but we're not going down that route. We're staying away from America, this podcast.
Well, just on the other question then, I mean, James is talking about how Western the Baltics are in their view. But then, the likes of Poland are just turning a little bit right, along with, Romania and Hungary and all the rest. They're
Slovakia too.
Yes. So it was just struck me that the kind of flavor of and the vision of the European Union and the European project is really different in Eastern Europe compared to Western Europe. So is that going to be a problem at some stage?
Eastern Europe is non-cosmopolitan. It's non-multicultural. It's incredibly white. It's incredibly white. The Baltics, these places look like Ireland 25 years ago. There are very, very few foreigners here. I think linguistically they're impervious because these are very, very hard languages. So it's very difficult to settle here.
Yeah.
But I think what you find across all of Central and Eastern Europe is an intolerance of immigration. That goes all the way from Croatia, Serbia, in the Balkans, all the way to the north to the Baltics. They just don't tolerate it. I'm not sure if it's legal, but I think it's cultural.
And what's that based in? Where did that come from?
I think it comes from their deep association that they are Christian Europeans. If you look at Russians have been fighting against, for example, and the Russian world has been fighting against the Ottomans since Peter the Great and against Islam.
Yeah.
The Russians, the Orthodox people here regard themselves in this part of the world as the absolute inheritors of real Christianity, Orthodox Christianity. They believe that Catholicism and Lutheranism and all the other religions here are actually a schism, and that basically Moscow is the new Rome.
Yes.
They believe this, right?
Yeah.
And I think when you're in the Baltics, they're looking at Germany. The Poles are looking at Germany. They're looking at all the race issues the Germans have, the race problems they seem to have.
And Sweden, I suppose, as well.
And Sweden as well.
Yeah.
And they're saying, we don't want that. And they are voting for parties that are nationalist, anti-immigration, and without too much disguise, sort of a whites-only party. I mean, when you actually strip back the rhetoric, that's what they mean.
So what's that going to do to Europe, to the EU in the long run then?
It's a really good question. I don't know. I haven't. I mean, there's a very clear immigration divide. Italy, France, Spain, Ireland, Britain, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, Norway, and Sweden, and Austria on the front line all have reasonably open immigration policies. The former colonial empires of Britain and France for obvious reasons, and us for EU reasons.
Yeah.
But we always make the point, it's quite interesting, we always make the point, we're obliged to take in these sort of immigrants and we're obliged to take in refugees. You don't hear that from these people. And they're governed by the same laws. So, but I also think what happens with immigration is the following, is that people immigrate in clusters, right? So you go where your mates are. You go where there's a cluster of people.
True,
So Nigerians go to where there's Nigerians, and Tunisians go to where there's Tunisians. In the same way as Irish people went to where there were Irish people in America in the past, or Irish areas of London or whatever.
I was going to say Kilburn, Cricklewood, Wimbledon in my case.
And, as I've said, the bizarre statistic is there are more English people with an Irish grandparent than there are Irish people with Irish grandparents, which is kind of an amazing statistic, right? But I think we should actually explore this a bit more. This part of the world's vision of what being European is very different to our vision of what being European is. And multiculturalism and diversity is very low down the scale here. That's very clear. Just walk around the streets.
Yeah.
And you get a totally different complexion of the societies. Does that mean that in the future that will hamstring them economically? That's the argument that's made in Ireland, that if we don't have the immigrants, nobody will be here to do the work. I'm not too sure. I mean, they have massive diasporas, and I'd say they will call those people home first before they change. Basically, this is the culture war is playing out here, and the culture war is very much that this is a white Christian, kind of post-Christian, but white Christian society, and that's what they want to look like, and that's what they do look like. So it takes if the minute you come home and you get on the Lewis, it's a different world.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, speaking of that, I'll be home very soon.
Oh,
did you miss me?
I look forward to it.
I'll be home from the book festival.
Excellent.
Listen, I'll talk to you later, Bob.
Good luck.